is going to reference a specific HTML elements or a group of elements. A declaration, which is the whole thing here, right? We had just talked about that with inline styling. A declaration has two parts. It's got a property, which is followed by a colon, and then it's got a space and then a value followed by a semicolon. So here we have the color property is going to be set with a value of red, and that makes our header turn red. Okay. Declarations, they sit between curly braces too. Okay, so keep all these things in mind. Definitely review this slide in the future for reference. HTML elements can be referenced by selectors in a number of ways, right? So we had talked about the actual tag name, but we can also use IDs, and we can use class selectors, right? So up here at the top, we've got the tag name with H1. Here we've got an ID for a nav bar where we set the background color of our ID as our ID nav bar as green, and then we can also go ahead and use a class, right, and say that everything in our web page that's happy is going to have a font size of 14 pixels. Maybe we want to set the background color yellow, but anything that we attach that happy class to is going to have those attributes or have those features. ID and class, as mentioned previously, are both universal attributes. So ID is for unique elements, such as you're a unique individual, and so you would probably have an ID if we use them for humans. And then classes are used to categorize elements into groups, right? Just as we mentioned before, if you belong to a class, maybe you're taking Philosophy 101, that would be the class that would be used to describe you. One of the many, probably. All right. Last and not least, we want to talk a little bit about comments. You can add comments to your CSS file to explain what it does. It's going to make your code a little bit easier for others to read and understand. There are two different types of comments that you can add. You can add multi-line and also single line. They both start with a / and an asterisk, and then end with an asterisk and then a /, right? Anything that's between those characters won't be interpreted by a browser. And so you have our multi-line comments up here, and then also our single line comments down here. The only difference is that one takes up one line, and then the other multi-line takes up multiple lines. All right. Fonts and font families. This is one of my favorites because I think that fonts are really critical when we're stylizing a website. Good font can make a huge difference. You want things to be simple and clean, especially on a mobile device. It makes it a lot easier to read. Typically want to stray away from decorative fonts for really small screens. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into fonts and just sort of the general field of typography. So a font is just a set of characters of a particular size and style. The primary way to specify fonts in CSS is just using the font family property, right, within a declaration. And there are three common types of fonts that you're going to see, and that will be tested on the HTML app development exam, right? We've got serif, sans serif, and then monospace. So serif is I guess an example of serif font is Times New Roman, and you can see that there are little decorations on the edges of the letter. I can't circle it because my fingers are too fat, so I apologize. But you can see there with the N, right? You have a couple of different decorations. Same thing with the R too. With sans serif, an example is Arial, and notice that there is no decoration. Like, these are super clean lines, right? Unlike the ones that I'm drawing on the screen. And then finally you have monospace. An example is Courier. We're also using another one as Consolas, which is in Web Matrix. You'll see it featured throughout our presentations, right? But each of these letters occupies the same amount of space. So it doesn't matter if it's a capital R or a lowercase I, they possess the same width, right? They occupy the same amount of screen space. All right, sometimes you're going to want to go ahead and import a font into your web page. And in order to do that, you have to use the @fontface rule. The @fontface, excuse me, The font face rule allows developers to use any font as long as it's located on their web server. It used to be the case that we had to use web-safe fonts, but that was basically limited to any fonts that were installed on a user's device. And so if you have all these different devices now, like just tons of smartphones, tons of laptops, tablets, you know, it's kind of a roll of the dice to sort of just make the assumption that somebody's going to possess the font that you want to use on their computer. And so the @font face rule is a really fantastic way to be able to access the fonts that you want to use on your website. And here's an example down at the bottom of the screen of how you would implement the @font face rule. Use the font family, excuse me, use the font family property, right? Insert the name of the font. And then you want to go ahead and indicate the source of the font that you're using. And that would be in the form of a URL, which is going to just be a link to a web page or happen to be a local file on your computer or on your web server. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the really interesting stuff, like how do we actually style these web pages? Let's talk about content flow, okay? Flow is a display style in HTML that focuses on filling content on a page horizontally in rows. So if I have my two hands, right, and so I'll put them over here so you can see them. If I add an element to a page, it occupies an entire row. If I add a second element to a page, naturally it's going to occupy the second row. They aren't going to automatically sort of appear on the same row, but rather we've got one that's going to sit on top of the other, okay? We can change this using flow with CSS, right? So we have block flow and then we also have inline flow, okay? And actually, let me go ahead and backtrack. I just misspoke a little bit. Not that we use block flow, there is block flow and then there is inline flow as well. So with block flow, you're going to see block level elements doing exactly what I just did with my hands. And then with inline flow, you've got different content that's going to fit in line with other content. So it maybe you embed an image or something along those lines within a paragraph, and that is going to appear like this little guy right there in our inline flow example there on the right. All right, so let's talk about positioning and how we can change the positioning on a page. Floating elements is the first thing on the list. In addition to modifying the flow of a page, HTML and CSS allow developers to position individual elements where they want them on a page, okay? The float property is going to allow you to move an element all the way to the left or to the right of a page here, just like our blue element, okay? The value of float is commonly going to be set to left or right. Okay, I want to go ahead and show you a quick example of this. And just a second, we'll come back to talk about clearing floats. So pardon me, I'm just going to sort of diverge from the course. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and show you here a quick float demo, right? So I've got my HTML text down here, just H1 float demo, right? We've got our header there. And then we've got two divs. I've got one ID'd as block 1, and then the second is ID'd as block 2. The first one is going to appear as a blue block, and I've styled that, and I'll show you that in just a second. And then the second one here is going to appear as a green block. And we're going to go ahead and mess with these two blocks a little bit, okay? Take a look at my style here. I've used the style tags embedded inside of the head element. I've got my divs, both divs, because this applies to all of them, are set to float to the left. Okay. Block 1 and block 2, both are a width of 200. The background color is simply blue for block 1 and then green for block 2, just like we had said. And then I added this attribute here, margin. It's going to add a little bit of space around the two blocks so they don't bump into each other too much, okay? So let's go ahead and pop this up on the screen. And having a couple of problems here, but that's not a worry. There we go. All right, so enlarge the font size so you can see, and it actually messed up my demo. But here you have two examples. You have the blue block and the green block. Right now I've got them set to float left, so blue block floats left first, and then green block floats in between. Now right next to it on the right. If I remove the float property, let's go ahead and comment that out actually. I'm just gonna copy this. If I comment that out and I save and I go ahead and I refresh the page, what happens is I have my first block level element is on the top, and then my next block level element is on the bottom, just like I had shown you earlier with my hands. Okay? Super important to keep in mind. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove these comments, and we'll go back to our presentation to talk about clearing. So sometimes you're going to float an element to the left or to the right, and you aren't going to want other floating elements to touch the left or the right-hand sides of an element. And in order to make that happen, in order to clear the left or the right, we're going to use the clear property. And we set the value as left, right, both, or none. So left is going to clear the left side, right is going to clear the right side, both clears both sides. Pretty self-explanatory, okay? Here in this example, we've cleared the left side for the element that's surrounded by the broken border, okay? All right, so we go back to Web Matrix, and I am going to take box 2, I'm going to delete these comments, and I'm going to add the clear left property here, okay? So I go back to my float demo, and I'm going to go ahead and hit right, and notice that we still have everything set as float left, but we still see both of the elements appearing as block level elements, right? And that's because for element 2, for block 2, I've gone ahead and I've cleared the left side of that element. All right, moving on. So let's talk about positioning, okay? You can position elements at specific points on a page using the position property. We've got a couple of different ways to do that. You can change the position property as make it static. You can make it relative, absolute, or fixed. Static is going to just simply position an element with its normal flow, just like you saw the boxes without any modification. Relative is going to position an element in relation to where it would normally be positioned in the flow of content, and I'll show you what that means here in just a second. Absolute ensures that the positioning of an element doesn't impact any other content at all, and then fixed places it in relation to the browser window, and it stays in the same place the entire time. I'm actually going to exit out of my presentation here, and we're going to go to Bing. I'm just going to do a really quick search here for, early human species found. That's exciting. Going to do a quick search for CSS position property. You can find a lot